Due Process, recipient of 6 Mid-Atlantic Emmy Awards.
I knew I was innocent. I knew, or at least I felt that the people that put me there knew that I was innocent.
He was serving a life sentence before Centurion Ministry put him on its list. The officially guilty believed by Centurion to be innocent. 25 wrongly imprisoned men and women have been freed so far by this Princeton-based program. Are there thousands of others serving time for crimes they didn't do? That's the question we'll tackle on this edition of Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process is made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding is provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual.
Could there be a worse nightmare? To be charged, convicted, incarcerated, and innocent. For one seminary student 20 years ago, the idea was so intolerable that it changed the course of his life and saved the lives of 25 others by proving their innocence and winning their release. But how many more innocent men and women remain behind bars or even on death row? I'm Raymond Brown, and on our docket for this edition of Due Process, the Princeton-based Centurion Ministries and the essential questions it raises about our entire judicial system. We'll meet a former prosecutor and a judge who knows the system and a Centurion lawyer who spent his career fighting the system. But first, here's Sandy King with the Centurion story and its latest convict client who's now back on the street.
Raymond, he served 15 years for rape before Centurion managed to mount an appeal that overturned his conviction. And that long wait makes Clarence Moore pretty typical of Centurion's cases. In fact, it takes years of investigation before the program even takes a case, because the folks at Centurion say they have to first be convinced of the convict's absolute factual innocence. Then the work begins, proving the really hard stuff like perjury by a witness or misconduct by a prosecutor. And even when Centurion is sure, there are courts that have to be convinced and a state that has to be satisfied. In Clarence Moore's case, that means he still faces a retrial, though for the first time in 15 years, he's finding out how freedom feels and struggling still to make sense of it all.
When you know you didn't commit a crime, you know you don't know anything about this, you figure, well, this wrong will be righted. You know, as soon as we get down to the police station, they'll straighten it out.
Instead, he would be indicted and tried, convicted, and jailed. Found guilty of rape, serving 25 to life. All along insisting he was innocent.
It's not so much whether you're innocent or guilty, it's like who got the best game, who got the best plan.
You didn't have the best
And I didn't
game.
have it. No.
And by the time he came close to what he calls vindication, freed by a federal appeals court, but facing yet another trial, Clarence Moore had lost everything. His wife, his kids, his home, his business, and 15 long years.
I knew I was innocent, and I knew that I had to do something to get out of there. And it kept me alive. It kept me going strong. It kept me in the law books, kept me on the law library, kept me in touch with Centurion Ministry.
And 14 years after he first heard about Centurion, the Princeton-based program won his release.
Good to see you. This is Clarence's first letter to us in September 6, 1987. You wrote that, and I wrote you back September 16th, 1987.
Wow.
But it would be another 6 years before Moore would finally make it onto this exclusive list. The names of those convicts examined, investigated, and accepted by Centurion as wrongfully convicted, wrongfully imprisoned.
We're just a small organization. We have 5 people. We stick our finger in the dike. That's all we do. But that's what we're called to do.
It was that calling that caused a 30-something Jim McCloskey to trade a lucrative career in international business for a stint in the seminary.
That whole house of cards came tumbling down.
But it was as a student chaplain on a Trenton State cell block that Jim found his mission, when a Newark man convicted of murder convinced him he was innocent.
Believe it or not, our criminal justice system is far more flawed than any of us want to believe.
So McCloskey made a life's commitment to find those falsely convicted and help them to get free. He chose the name Centurion with intention.
It was a centurion that stood at the foot of the cross and declared Christ wrongfully convicted. Surely this one was innocent.
And when Kate Germond saw Jim's story in the New York Times, she found her life's work as well.
So I called him up, and I was the first person to call Jim, asking to help rather than seeking help. We met, thought we could probably get along, and here I am.
And 16 years later, they still share the commitment and the work. They also share very little money, endless hours, and the satisfaction of knowing they have freed 25 innocent people who, without them, would still be behind bars.
I love this work. I'm deliriously happy doing it.
Not many people doing it.
Right. Yeah, that's the sad part. The worst part of this job is when a mother calls and begging you to take on a case, and you have to tell her that we are overwhelmed. You met Chris, yeah, in the beginning.
There are 1,400 such calls and letters every year. But Clarence Moore was one of the lucky ones. It took 6 years, but when the public defenders and state appeals had been exhausted, Centurion stepped in. Enlisted Hoboken lawyer Paul Castellaro, another true believer with an impressive record of overturning convictions, and went to federal court.
This is all the stuff they had that, we didn't know they had.
And evidence that may have been withheld was just one potential source of appeal. There was DNA evidence in his favor, and the fact that the victim could not ID her attacker until after she'd been hypnotized.
This is a pretty powerful bit of evidence in your case.
But what impressed the Third Circuit and won the reversal was the prosecution's appeal to the jury on race. Condemned by the court as irrelevant, illogical, offensive, and prejudicial, was this from the state's summation.
Basically, the prosecutor's case was, you have to know that Clarence Moore is guilty because when Clarence's white wife testified, you understood immediately that this is a man who had a predilection for having sex with white women.
Race was used to convict me. Race was used to arrest me and indict me.
But once the conviction was overturned, it was up to Atlantic County to decide to dismiss or retry. The announcement came. Clarence Moore would face a new trial.
Clarence is innocent. There's no way Clarence is going back to prison.
And if she's right, Moore will join Centurion's list of successes. Against the odds, another ex-con with reason to be glad that Jim McCloskey found his calling.
Now, look, I'm not saying everybody's innocent who's in prison. Of course not. But most people who are in prison did what they're in there for. But a heck of a lot didn't do what they're in there for.
Figure it out. There's way more people wrongfully convicted than people even dare to believe.
And what the folks at Centurion believe goes to the very heart of American justice, because at the core of the Centurion program is the conviction that there are far more innocent among the imprisoned than any of us would like to think. At Centurion, they estimate that as many as 10% of inmates may in fact not be guilty. When Barry Scheck of the Innocence Project was last on this show, he placed the estimate even higher. And we're talking huge numbers with more than 2 million prisoners in this country. If Centurion and the Innocence Project are correct, that could mean more than 200,000 innocent men and women are, right now, behind bars.
And that frightening number is where we'll pick it up when we come back. Here in the studio, we'll talk to a defense lawyer whose work with Centurion and on his own has freed 10 men who are doing serious time. And we'll hear from a former federal prosecutor and a Superior Court judge who says the system may be healthier than its critics would suggest. So stay with us.
I think sometimes people don't get a fair shake, yeah.
If they're in jail, they had to do something bad.
You got a lot of people that are in jail that are not guilty.
Always innocent people in jail.
I'm sure there probably are. In terms of why, there's probably too many reasons I can really go into at this point.
I have faith in our justice system. I don't think that many innocent people get arrested.
You think that everybody in jail is guilty?
Theoretically, yes.
I think there's a lot of people in jail that shouldn't be there. Definitely. Definitely.
Is that true? And if it is, what does that say about our criminal justice system? Defense lawyer Paul Castellero says it means the system is seriously flawed. In association with Centurion and on his own, he's been responsible for the exoneration and release of 10 state prison inmates, all of whom had been serving long sentences. But former federal prosecutor and Superior Court Judge Marian Espinoza-Murphy is likely to take issue with the idea that the wholesale miscarriage of justice had huge numbers of innocent people behind bars. Paul, let me turn to you. We've had numbers flying around the room and differing opinions, but is it your view after a long time in the criminal justice system that in fact there's a systemic problem? These aren't isolated incidents, but a systemic problem that should have us concerned about innocent people behind bars?
Yeah, I think that's true. There's been, I think, 100 DNA exonerations in the last 10, 11 years. Exactly, I think it's 99 or 100 individuals have been exonerated that have been on death row. Of the, I think it's 700 death penalty cases have come to final disposition. Of that, 1 in 7 of those people have been released from death row and exonerated and demonstrated to be innocent. So I think there is a real systemic problem, and I think it relates chiefly to the lack of funds.
Let me ask you this. It sounds like the implications of what you're saying is that there could be thousands of people throughout the country in jail who are innocent. I mean, if we take the numbers that you've posited,
well,
you think it may be that sizable?
Well, when you have when you use the DNA example and the DNA evidence, where you can prove one way or another whether somebody was the person, and it shows when there's something to test, like blood or semen or some material that can identify a person, and you show there are 100 cases of exoneration. I mean, I think that presents a fairly frightening case and shows that this is a systemic problem existing. And it relates chiefly, I think, to, in almost all these cases, the question of eyewitness identification is a major component of the state's case. And I think when you have that, you have a really good possibility of a miscarriage of justice occurring.
Marianne, should we be taking this seriously and focused on it? Some people might say, well, Paul's a criminal defense lawyer and has a certain view of the system, but the numbers he talks about certainly suggest we should be concerned. Should we be?
We should always be concerned that our system of justice is providing the best product to our consumers. I mean, I hate to sound blunt about it, but we are consumers of a system here, and we are always, should be concerned about improving things. DNA is such a wonderful advancement, and it does allow us to exclude people who have been unfairly convicted, and it's also going to be a wonderful source of identifying people who might have gone undetected for their crimes.
Let me ask you a question about the standards. We have all, as lawyers, read lots of cases in which judges say, we do the best we can, but no system is perfect. On the other hand, each of us would say that the specter of any person spending time behind bars when they're truly innocent is a horrible one. In terms of looking at a system and deciding whether we should be losing sleep because it just isn't fair, what's an acceptable limit? I mean, what would you look to determine whether basically the system is fair or it has such a flaw that we should be even more than concerned, just worried sick over it?
Well, I don't think we should be overly concerned with the numbers, because while the numbers create a very provocative statement, they cannot be proved or disproved as to whether X number of people are innocent who are behind bars. It just can't be proven one way or the other. But what we should be concerned is with the prospect, and it's a wonderful fact that our concern as a society that no innocent person should be convicted should fuel our desire to continually reinvent and inspect what is wrong with our system. I think Paul was making reference earlier to certain problems which will have a tendency to produce an unfair result, such as underfunding of certain defenses for people who can't afford them otherwise. And I think that that's where the focus should be.
But partly we're dealing with two people who we respect as being knowledgeable about the system, and one of them says, based on all the numbers he's looked at and his own experience, he thinks that there may be tens of thousands of people who are not guilty, more than not guilty, or innocent, behind bars. Is it your sense that that's a reality, that that's true?
I'm sure there are some people behind bars who don't belong there. But one of the things about our system is that it is subject to human frailties at every phase of the procedure. And while that is a weakness in our system, it is also a strength in our system. I remember years ago reading about a project at one of the universities where they would take the information about the facts of a crime and input it into a computer and see what the result was and compare it to a jury. And inevitably, the jury, composed of human beings with human feelings and human passions and sometimes compassion, was tended to be more likely to acquit the defendant under the same facts when they were presented to a computer. Now, there are going to be times when those passions work against the defendant.
But let me come back to Paul. Are you talking about...
But a trial involves a prosecutor, it involves a judge, it involves a defense attorney. And those are, and they create such large variables. It's not a computerized system where the same presentation is made to these ideal jurors, and they make a determination. You have prosecutorial misconduct. You have lawyers that are unprepared. You have judges that are biased. I mean, you have all those kinds of factors that weigh in to create a wrongful conviction. A lot of cases where you don't have DNA evidence and you get a so-called an exoneration, it's a result of bad lawyering, is a result of prosecutorial misconduct. And these are things that we're constantly striving to fix, but in fact, you create a certain climate, and the climate is that we have a crime problem. We have we have to do something about it. We have to align our citizens' fears, and that creates this climate where people want to get a conviction, and then you spend years and years and years trying to overcome it. And people say, well, we're trying our best. We're trying our best. I agree. I think people do try their best, but as long as we allow certain things to happen, if we underfund the criminal justice system, if we underfund the public defender's office and these various indigency groups, I think we're just saying we're going to tolerate wrongful convictions.
All right, let me see if I can get past your presentation that seems so reasonable, and that is this. If in fact McCluskey is right, the Centurion Ministries guy, and there is 10%, we're talking about maybe several 100,000 people innocent in jail. Right. Based on your experience, and you've been around, and I know you haven't been around and counted everybody and looked at every case, but does your gut tell you that that's close to an accurate number? Because it seems to me that suggests systemic problems that we all need to really be concerned about and focused on and generating a lot of resources to attack.
Well, that would be a frightening number, wouldn't it?
Yes,
10%.
it would be. Right.
I think it truly would be, and I think each of us can only speak to our own experience. I have only recently started doing some criminal defense work, and of course that gives you a very different perspective from having been a prosecutor and a judge. One thing that I agree with Paul completely, that there are opportunities for miscarriages of justice based upon the frailties of all the humans involved, not the juries, but each of the other persons. What I can say is, having watched both criminal cases and civil cases at trial, I always understood every verdict that I saw in a criminal case. Whether I agreed with it or not, I could understand why it came out the way it did. I don't always feel that way about civil cases.
So that you haven't been sitting in the courthouse seeing cases and saying, oh my goodness, that's a miscarriage and an innocent person is going away.
Well, I have not seen that, because I've also had the opportunity, and perhaps there's a bit of my own involvement here that's going to color my thinking, but as a prosecutor, when I saw that there was a chance that someone might be convicted when they shouldn't be, I had the opportunity to say, no, this person's not going to be prosecuted. And as a judge, I had sometimes a more limited opportunity.
All of your colleagues have the same standards?
I would hope so.
But are you willing to say yes with certainty?
I can't say that. I think that the fact is that when you become an advocate, there is a tremendous push within the individual to believe in what they're doing. And sometimes that can color judgment in a way that doesn't benefit the system.
Well, the crown never loses when justice is done. Paul, let me push you a little bit. If this is systemic, there's got to be a cause or some causes that are more likely to produce these bad results than others. What's the principal cause, then, of what you believe to be hundreds of thousands of innocent people behind bars?
Well, I think the primary cause is ineffective assistance of counsel, where you have and that's primarily caused by, I think, a lack of funding.
Does that suggest that the poor or people who are less able to afford the most expensive private lawyers are most likely to be visited with this?
Oh, absolutely. I think the poor, most of the cases that we've dealt with, that I've dealt with, they've been people that couldn't afford their own attorney. They were indigent. They were dependent upon somebody doing something for them, and I think they were all in a position where they are actually kind of hoping that someone's going to do the right thing by them, and it doesn't always happen.
Okay. And Marianne, since I've been unable to nail you down to a number, let me ask you whether you would agree that there is a different quality of justice for the poor in the criminal justice system, and that therefore, obviously, some need to focus on that problem.
Oh, I'm going to disagree to a certain extent with this, because I think that people who qualify for a public defender often get better representation than people who scrape together a few nickels just so that they can get, in their mind, a real lawyer and get someone not, of course, at the level of Paul's abilities, but someone who is a ham and egger and doesn't quite know their way to the courthouse, because I think that the public defenders, by and large, do a wonderful job with the resources that they have.
I wasn't necessarily criticizing public defenders. I think what the other thing you have to understand in these numbers and these wrongful convictions is that you have 50 states and you have 50 judicial systems, and the funding varies state to state radically, where you may have in New Jersey, you have a fairly well-funded public defender system. You go down to some southern states and they'll pay a lawyer $250 or $2,500 for death penalty.
Well, given the positive things that many have said about New Jersey's public defender system, I think including yourself, does that mean New Jersey has a smaller problem of innocence behind bars because we have a better funded and a more experienced public defender system, or not?
Well, I think we have a better funded and more experienced public defender system. We have open discovery. I think we have more people that question things than they do in a lot of other states.
So does
I think open discovery does
that mean this problem is less of a
towards,
problem in New Jersey than it is elsewhere in your experience?
I think that's probably true. Yeah, New Jersey's the open discovery is a big difference whereby the defense and the prosecutor both have the same information.
But you've had some New Jersey cases.
Yes, I've had plenty of New Jersey cases. 4 or 5 of 6 of my cases have been New Jersey cases, okay. But a lot of times that involves that can involve a prosecutorial misconduct.
Right. Marianne, as we're winding down, I know that you're a critical thinker. So are there any flaws in the criminal justice system that trouble you, or are you pretty happy as you drive home today saying, I can whistle all the way home because the justice system's in good shape?
Well, I think that an important point is that I think that New Jersey, compared to the rest of the country, does have better standards in terms of prosecution, defense, and judging as well. And one of the points I think that I raised this before the program is the fact that of the people who actually go to trial in New New Jersey, the statistics show well over a third are acquitted on a regular basis. So while there may be flaws in the system, we know that people who do take the system to the limits will often find that their quest is rewarded.
Right, let me unfairly opinion Paul with the need in 20 seconds to tell us what's the most important thing to do in New Jersey to make this problem less of a concern.
I think the system itself has to, when a defendant appears in court and the defendant's insisting that he's innocent, and I think the people that deal with that person have got to take him seriously.
Got to go, Paul. It sounds like we'll have to come back and revisit it, because that's it for this edition of Due Process. But we hope you'll be here next week when we'll take on another cutting-edge issue of law and social justice. Until then, for Sandy King and all of us here, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
I'm not saying everybody's innocent who's in prison, of course not. But most people who are in prison did what they're in there for. But a heck of a lot didn't do what they're in there for. And we only stick, we're just a small organization. We have 5 people. We stick our finger in the dike. That's all we do. But that's what we're called to do. And we, you know, if you can save one life, it's a great thing. As a group, and with great lawyers who we bring in, we retain and hire them and work with them together as a team with other people. We're able to, so far, save 25, and hopefully by the time I end up my little time here on Earth, it might be a little bit more than that.
Major funding for Due Process was made possible by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law. Additional funding was provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual,